So we are starting again with Olivier Sigaud for just a continuation of the class of this morning. And as a continuation, we can start with the first question that was asked during the lunch break, that I ask it again, here again for the record. Why do we use mostly policy search techniques in robotics and physics? Is it because of continuous actions?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, yes. In robotics, we are often interested in continuous actions, in control problems in general, and there using actors, so policies is mandatory because you don't have a discrete set and you cannot just use a critique, okay? But as I explained in my very first video, you can also explain soft actor critique and those actor critique methods starting from the approximate dynamic programming or the tabular reinforcement learning route. So you don't need to go through all the policy gradient techniques to go there. Yeah, so to me, policy search is a very general term and it can also mean discrete actions. But yes, it's more used in the continuous action domain. A second point that I want to share with you before starting the afternoon session is that there was this morning a controversy about using or not a minus in front of the loss function to perform the policy gradient update. So I just checked my code to make sure, and the story is as follows. In the equation, to compute the policy gradient, you don't need a minus, okay? You are maximizing a reward, so you want to maximize a gradient. But when you turn it into a loss function, you want to minimize that loss function, so you need a minus in front of the loss function, indeed, okay? And in my code, I just checked that I am taking minus the log grad of the policy times the reward. Okay, so there is a minus and that's now clear. Okay, so this afternoon we do something a little different. I will just show you a few examples of applying policy gradient techniques, and the simplest one, the reinforced ones, to very basic classic control benchmark, and to show you that there are very quickly some issues that I want to share with you. There will be just 4 short videos. That's about less than 40 minutes, so we will have about 20 minutes for questions. So let's start. Lessons untitled Policy Gradient in Practice. In this lesson, we will apply basic policy gradient algorithms to simple benchmark. The goal is to better understand what is happening and what are the immediate limitations. With the subtitle, I'm alluding to a great talk from Ali Raimi at NeurIPS a few years ago, where he explained that machine learning was drifting away from science to alchemy, as more and more people are looking for working recipes without trying to understand why they work. So in these lessons, we will investigate 4 variants of the reinforced algorithm. One where we use the sum of rewards, one where we use a discounted sum of rewards, one where we normalize this discounted sum of rewards, and one where we add a baseline. And we will use mainly 3 OpenAI Gym classic control environment, the cart pole, the continuous mountain car, and pendulum. And we will also use 3 kinds of policies, a Bernoulli policy, a normal policy, and a squash-Gaussian policy. What we will do is that we will visualize those policies, the corresponding critiques, and the learning curve so as to understand what's happening. I strongly believe that doing this kind of experiment is a prerequisite before going to state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithm and to switch to harder benchmarks, because this is by studying those things that you understand what's happening. And in my opinion, understanding phenomena is better than using black box algorithm. In that respect, I completely agree with Ali Raimi. Those results that I will show you have been obtained with a code that is available on this GitHub repository that I am using with my students to teach them those policy gradient algorithms. So I told you that we would use 3 different kinds of policies. So the first is the Bernoulli policy, where you have a binary choice between two actions. Okay, so you have a number p which is between 0 and 1, and with probability p you take the first action, and with probability 1 minus p you take the other action. Okay, the normal policy is just a Gaussian. Okay, where here the output of the neural network will give you the center and the variance of the Gaussian, eventually in many dimensions, but in the benchmark that we will use, there will be mostly one dimension for action. And finally, the squash Gaussian is exactly as the normal policy, but on top of the Gaussian, we use a hyperbolic tangent so that the output action is bounded between two bounds that we can determine. Okay, and in all these policies, the parameters theta corresponds to the weight and biases of neural networks that are used between a state as input and the action that the policy is providing with some stochasticity. So we will start with the easiest classic control environment, which is called cart pole. Okay, so in this environment, you just have to move this part of the cart pole so as to keep this pole balanced. Okay, you have 4 state dimensions: the position, the speed along this axis, the angle, and the angular velocity of the pole. Okay, and you just have 2 binary actions. You can either push left or push right. And for that, you can use either a discrete with 2 actions or a Bernoulli stochastic policy where you select between the 2 actions. And to push those studies further, I have also defined a custom continuous cart pole environment where you can have an action which is between pushing left or pushing right with a force that depends on the value of the action. Okay. In this environment, you just use 200 steps. You get a reward of +1 at each step, so the utility that you get is between 0 if you fall immediately and 200 if you stay up for 200 time steps. So if you plug any standard policy gradient with different ways to compute the reward in cart pole, basically you get something that works. As you see, performance starts close to 0 and moves towards 200 quite easily, okay, without tuning many things. Okay. Here what you can see is the variance over 10 runs, and you can see that the signal is quite noisy, and the 3 approaches work well. So what's interesting is that you don't need for additional exploration. The stochasticity of the binary policies is enough for these algorithms to work well. So what do we see here? In fact, as I told you, there are 4 dimensions, so you cannot visualize a policy in a 4-dimension state. So what I did is that I have some wrapper that allows me to choose the order of the parameters. And here I will always display the first 2. So here I have chosen to visualize the position and the angle. And the other values for the velocity and angular velocity, I just take some small random values. And here I depict the value output by the policy given a state corresponding to a particular cell in the state space. And here the color tells you what is the action. So black consists in pushing left, yellow consists in pushing right. And you can see that the initial policy takes random actions. And after training, you can see that the policy tells you that when you are on the right, you should push left. When you are on the left, you should push right. And in between, you should manage the pole, okay, depending on the angle. You can see that it is better to push a little further when you are here and a little further when you are here. We can also have a look at the stochasticity of the policy and its evolution through time. So to draw these pictures, I am drawing random states, for instance 10,000 random states, and I'm looking at the decision threshold P to determine whether I will take a left or a right action. And you can see that in the very beginning, whatever the state, the decision threshold P is around 0.5. Actually, it's between 0.51 and 0.57. So here the choice in the beginning will be mostly random between going left and right. Okay, but after training, there are much more states where the decision threshold is 0 or 1. And those extreme value means a deterministic choice, because if your probability to go left is 1, then you will go left, and if it is 0, then you will go right, etc. So this very simple experiment shows that looking for optimality pushes towards less exploration, because you start with something very stochastic and you end up with something which is much more deterministic. And okay, the optimal policy might be deterministic if the problem itself is quite deterministic. Okay, this was the very beginning of this presentation, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, there is no much meat in this one, so I will immediately switch to the second one where I start presenting some issues. So let us continue with CartPol and have a look at some issues. So first, I told you in a previous class that it was a good practice to normalize the rewards by taking the average of the reward and divide it by the standard deviation, so that the values of the reward are between 0 and 1. In CartPol and continuous CartPol, the point is that the reward is 1 for all steps before failure. Choose the reward minus the mean of the reward is always 0, and the standard deviation is always 0. So you cannot apply this computation, okay? If you discount the reward, then you avoid this, because the rewards will get discounted and you will get something different from the mean and some standard deviation. But anyways, what you get is a globally poorly informative gradient. In the sum case, longer trajectories are more rewarded, so you will train more from longer trajectories, and this is what makes the policy gradient work, but that's not a very strong learning signal. Before going to the second issue, I have to explain you that separating training and evaluation epochs is a good practice. Okay, the idea is that if you evaluate a deterministic version of the policy, you will get less noisy results. So here you have evaluation during training with the stochastic policy, and here you have evaluation for just evaluation episodes of the deterministic policy, which is trained with its stochastic version. And one point is that here you have many episodes, whereas here you just count the evaluation episode, so you have much less episodes to learn exactly the same thing. But in practice, of course, you also need the training episode that you don't see here. So the question is, how do you get the deterministic version of the policy so as to evaluate it? A simple idea, if you take the Bernoulli policy, is just to look at the number that it is used as a threshold, the number p, okay? And if this threshold is over 0.5, then you will always take right, and if it's below 0.5, you will always take left. But the point is that with the default initialization, you get something unexpected. So here you have the histogram of threshold values for many states, as you have already seen in the previous video. And you can see that all the decision thresholds are between 0.51 and 0.57, whereas here this is a second initial policy, and you can see that all the thresholds are below 0.5. So if you take this stochastic policy and you turn it into a deterministic policy that way, it will always take the decision to go right, whereas this one will always take the decision to go left. So their evaluation as a deterministic policy will be very poor, because it's not taking right decisions. Okay, so it is interesting to figure out that initial Bernoulli policies are not initialized with a threshold around 0.5. A third issue arises when we switch from the Bernoulli policy to the Gaussian policy. So here you have the curve of the Bernoulli policy, and if you just plug the Gaussian policy in place of the Bernoulli policy, this is what you get. It does not work anymore. You don't reach 200. Okay, this policy was coded with adaptive variance, and Okay, it does not work. So the question is, when you get this kind of curve, you have to figure out what's happening. And it can be quite difficult. You can have many ideas, try different things to figure out, and it may take time to debug. So in that particular case, the issue was the following. Here you have some code of the normal policy class that I was using, okay? And here the standard deviation was obtained from a neural network where I was just using a soft plus layer given the state to determine the standard deviation. Okay. But the point is that when you initialize neural networks with standard PyTorch libraries without specifying anything, what they will do in practice is that the network will be initialized in such a way that the output will be close to zero. Okay, that's what you get with the Gloro initialization, for instance. But if your standard deviation and your actions are very close to zero, in fact, your policy does mainly nothing and the poll will just fall. But if the poll just falls, you get very few reward signal and you don't learn anything and it does not work. So due to this initialization, the variance is very small. All the trajectories keep the same. So if you replace this way to initialize just by taking a fixed variance, by taking a value of 2, for instance, this is what I did in this debug, then you get something that works. And tuning this number can help. So if you just perform the change that I've told you, then you get something that starts learning. Another idea would be to use a squash Gaussian so that you get your actions bounded into some interval, and by doing this, it might work also. So about the squash Gaussian, see the soft actor critique video. Just to illustrate the difference between a Bernoulli policy and a normal policy, here you have a binary choice between taking right and taking left. And here, since your policy takes continuous actions, you have a more smooth transition between taking right and taking left. But the global picture looks the same. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, questions are slow to come. Okay, there is one. Okay, that's a question about regularizing the policy so that for close enough states, you have close enough actions. Actually, neural networks more or less ensure this, okay? These are different rangeable functions where if you take very, very similar input, you will get similar output. Depending on your problem, you want to stress more this regularity, but in some problems it can be the case, and okay, we will see an example soon, where for very similar states you should take completely different actions, and in that case, using a neural network and regularizing it might be a bad idea. Maybe I should just play all the videos.
You have a batch of questions that just arrived.
Take all the
questions. It's a mini batch, but
sorry?
You have a batch of questions that just arrived.
Okay. What are the disadvantages of a fixed variance? Okay, the idea is that if you have a fixed variance, it means fixed exploration all along the time, okay? Whereas it's probably, and as I've shown you, to become optimal, probably you have to become deterministic. So that's a question of the exploration exploitation trade-off that will be covered in the next class, okay? But what you should do is explore a lot in the beginning and exploit loss in the end. But if you have a fixed variance, you will explore the same amount all the time. So that's definitely not the best idea. Is it possible to use some reparameterization trick for standard initialization for normal distribution instead of fixing it to constant? Yes, this is more or less what we do with the squash Gaussian. Okay, I won't go into that, but of course there is better to do than using a constant. So that's more or less the same question. Okay, let's move. Let's go ahead.
I think you did not answer to the question of Hodei.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not. Maybe I'm wrong, but I checked
Where is it
the
again?
question, and maybe you are confused by that.
Excuse me, I've lost the correct screen.
I read it. The normalization of reward is updated in batches of training, or is it fixed at the start?
I don't understand the question.
Oh, you are speaking of normalizing the reward. That was good practice, you said. And I think the question is about, should we find the normalization?
In fact, there are different ways to normalize the reward. One thing is to take a lot of experiments and to normalize the rewards over those experiments, or you can use some a priori knowledge about your problem so as to just use a function to shift the reward to some domain. Okay. Does changing the initialization fix the issue too? I did not try to change the initialization, so yes, but yes, I can tell you that if you use a handmade initialization, then you can have something that works better. Yes. Okay, let's move to the next, and I will take more questions afterwards.
Okay, while you are starting the video, keep going. Just
Yes.
one small announcement. So we would have a meet the speaker session at 5:30, I think. So contrary to what we did yesterday, this time we will just open the session on the Wova meetup and connect who wants to connect. If there is too many people, we will just select first come, first served, something like that.
Okay, beware that I am not registered on Wova, so myself, I cannot be on Wova.
Yeah, I will give you the Zoom link directly.
Okay, thank you. So let's go.
Yeah.
And now have a look at learning a critique as a baseline. So here, first a look at an optimal critique. So we start with an initial random critique, and you can see that the values are organized randomly into a gradient where the values are all very small, between minus 0.05 and 0.25. And you get this critique, you take a Bernoulli policy, you train it using policy gradient, and you train your critique using the Monte Carlo estimate method, where you get batches obtained along policy training. Okay. And finally, what you get is this. Okay. Here you have a value of around 80, and here the values are close to 0. So the general idea of this critique is that it is better to be with null angle and position, so to be there, and it's more important to be with a null position than with a null angle, as the spread is larger in this size than in this size. Okay, so that's what we should get when it works. So first, let's have a look at the difference of dynamics between using the Monte Carlo estimation and the temporal difference estimation method. So as a reminder, in Monte Carlo, you collect batches, then you compute the discounted sum of reward over trajectories, and you minimize the square distance between what those trajectories tell you and the output value of the critique. Whereas in temporal differences, you take elementary samples, you compute the temporal difference error for each of these samples, and you train your critique from those samples. And here is the dynamics of the loss in those two methods. So in Monte Carlo, you can see that the loss is initially very large and goes down to 0, whereas in temporal difference methods, it starts at 0 and it starts increasing, and eventually it should decrease again. So why this difference? In fact, in Monte Carlo, the value of your batches, so your target values, corresponds to the value obtained with trajectories, so it's initially very high, and your network is initialized close to 0. So in the beginning, the loss is the distance between the two, and as your network is trained, its output goes closer and closer to the values corresponding to the trajectories, so the loss goes towards 0 little by little. But here, for instance, you can see that it does not go to 0, And that's one of the difficulty with training a critic, which is that it's not always an easy regression problem where your regression error may come to zero. By contrast with temporal difference methods, in fact, the computation of your temporal difference error signal is dependent on the critic itself. So in the beginning, all these values are close to zero, and your temporal difference error is close to zero, so the loss itself is close to zero. But as long as you are training those critic values, they start increasing, and the loss will also start increasing up to a certain value, which is the average temporal difference error that you get during training, and then it may go down again. But the big difference between those two methods is that here in this computation, the target value here is just dependent on your trajectories. So while training your network, you don't need to recompute the values from the batch again as your critic changes. Okay, so you can use the same batch for a long time until it converges towards something small. Whereas here, as the value of your target is dependent on the value of your network, each time you update your network, you should recompute your targets again. So you have to collect a new batch and do it again and again. The other option being to use a target critic, as I explained in the DDPG video. Another interesting point is that we may expect the loss of the critic to go down to zero. Once it is completely trained, a neural network should have a very low loss function because its output is always correct. That's not the case either here with a Bernoulli policy and here from a normal policy. You can see that after a while the loss of the critic is still very high, and if you look for a much longer time, so a much larger number of training epochs, you can see that the loss does not go to zero at all. That's surprising. So why is this so? In fact, the idea is that in Bernoulli policies, randomness of policies does not go down to zero. So the policy is always trying various actions that are not the best action. So the critic will sometimes indicate that there is an error. This is why the loss won't go to zero. And that's the same with the normal policies, where if you have a fixed Gaussian variance, the actions that you will take are not optimal. There is still some exploration, and this exploration incurs a loss in the critic, because the critic will tell you that the action you just took was not the optimal one. And in the squash Gaussian case, that's the same story, even if you get a tunable variance. But the main point that I want to stress is that in fact, the fact that the loss does not go to zero is very important in fact. Because as you will see on the next slide, if the loss goes to zero, the policy might degenerate. The idea is that if the loss goes to zero, it means that the policy is becoming truly deterministic. And if the policy is truly deterministic, you get the same data again and again, and that's not good for training a neural network. So this is illustrated with this slide. Okay, here you have the optimal critic that you have already seen in the previous slides, and here you have a critic that you obtain when you train your critic from a very good policy that was obtained from using Monte Carlo for a long time. And as you can see, this critic is much worse than this one. So from the top policy, learning a critic degenerates because you get data always from the same optimal trajectory, so you don't have enough exploration, and the lack of variations in the input data makes it that the neural network will degenerate. So in practice, what you can see is that here you have a case without a baseline, and here you have a case with a baseline. And in the case where the baseline degenerates, then the performance of the corresponding policy will start degenerating too. And sometimes degeneracy can be much more abrupt than on this case. So again, be cautious with learning a baseline. You have to make sure that your baseline won't degenerate and that it's properly tuned so that you get a good enough baseline, but not too good. And again, if you have any question, don't hesitate to ask.
Okay, so I just have one question here. So the question is, I don't understand why the temporal difference loss increases. We have a difference of two Q-value estimations, and it could increase as it could decrease. So maybe I am missing something. Okay, the point is that it starts at zero, and the loss is something positive. In general, it's quadratic. So in the beginning, it can only increase to something. Okay, and then it may decrease or increase depending on the difference between the two Q values. What will happen in general is that in the beginning, as you start finding some reward somewhere, the time that the reward propagates over the state action space, the error that you will make during your updates is a little larger, okay? So your error will tend to increase in the beginning, and then it should go down again once your Q values start being close to optimal. How can we avoid the degeneracy? Should we force the actor not to follow too much the critique so that it doesn't overlearn? In fact, this is a lot the issue of exploitation trade-off. Okay, if you stop exploring too early, first you might be in a local minimum, and that's not good. But also you might encounter this degeneracy effect. So that's a difficult question, and yeah, and I'm not sure there is a general recipe for that. Why are the scales apparently different in TD loss and Monte Carlo loss? So this is, hello Patrick. This is exactly what I explained with the second slide, that in Monte Carlo, you make a difference between the Monte Carlo estimate along a complete trajectory. So you always get in a reward in the end, and this number can be large. Whereas with temporal difference methods, you are just making differences at the scale of one step. So this difference can be very small. This is why you get something different. Okay, in fact, the question is about learning stochastic policies. Here I am using the standard policy gradient techniques, and those techniques need the policy to be stochastic. Okay, we could have a different story with deterministic policies. We would not get exactly those same phenomena. But here, since I am using reinforce, I have to stick to stochastic policies. What we will see if we plot Monte Carlo loss for temporal difference model during training. I suggest you try. That's a good exercise. Okay, I never tried, so I cannot answer. What would happen in the experiment if we have non-stationary environment? In that case, certainly the temporal difference error will keep being large. Okay, so the policy should not converge. Regarding the issues of learning a critique from a top policy, is it a general issue? In inverse reinforcement learning, we do learn a critique from a given policy that encounters a small sample of states. Yeah, I never played with inverse reinforcement learning, so I don't know if you have to provide enough variety in your data when you are using inverse reinforcement learning, but that's probably the case. So sorry, I cannot answer accurately. We can maybe add an entropy term in the actor. Of course, in fact, here I am playing with the very, very basic algorithms to show you that if you just use plain policy gradient algorithms without any additional exploration, then you will run into trouble. And of course, one solution is to add exploration. We will see examples of that in the last video that will start soon. If the loss never goes to zero, does it mean that the Q network does not represent QP? In fact, it does not represent it exactly. The point is that as long as there is still some stochasticity in the policy, there should be still some variance in the values that you learn with your critique. So your critique should not converge to something precise. What's the advantage of normalizing rewards? Would it not be better to normalize returns instead. Again, that's the question of step-based learning versus trajectory learning. Okay. If you want to learn from rewards, then in fact, I will speak about this in the last video, but if you learn from one-step rewards, then it's nice if those rewards are small positive numbers. So it's nice to normalize them. Is there any difference between episodic and continuous environments for this algorithm? Okay, just a word about the naming of the things. Episodic means that an environment is stopping at some point after some horizon, okay? Continuous, in general, you use continuous to say that's continuous action or continuous state. So you rather mean infinite horizon environment, okay? And in all these experiments, I'm definitely using episodic, the episodic case. That's generally what we do in policy search because we generally don't consider an infinite horizon. But yeah, I don't know how to adapt those techniques to the infinite horizon case. Okay, let's move to the last video and then I will still have time for taking more questions. Sorry. There we are.
Finally, let us now consider other benchmarks than CARTPOL. As you will see, in fact, CARTPOL is the only classic control benchmark where basic reinforced methods are working. So let's have a look first at continuous mountain car. So in continuous mountain car, you have this car here, and the goal is to bring it up to the flag that is here by pushing the car. And you get a reward of plus 100 if you reach the flag, and a small penalty for the pushing force you are using. So you should push as few as possible. And one important point is that the slope is too strong for the engine. So if you start from here and just push to the right, you won't succeed in reaching the flag. The car will go down again. So you will have to go to the left before going right to use some momentum to reach the flag. Another point is that if you are using a Bernoulli policy, then you cannot find the weak pushing actions that will allow you to minimize the pushing force. A key property of this benchmark is that it suffers from a deceptive gradient effect. It means that without successful exploration, you will never reach the flag. So the best you can do is minimize the pushing force so as to stop moving, and your car should stop moving after a while. Okay, and this is what will happen if you don't succeed in reaching the flying in the beginning of the experiments. So let's use continuous mountain car and just plug a Gaussian policy with a basic policy gradient algorithm. So what do we get? If you look here at the scale, we get a negative reward that is just huge. That's 10 to the power of 12. Okay, so it does not work at all, and it even diverges. What's happening? In fact, the point is that the actions are unbounded. Okay, so the policy might tell the car to go to the right. So the gradient is trying to push right stronger and stronger, and you get penalized for those stronger and stronger actions, but in practice the actions are not applied, so you won't succeed in pushing more than with a force of 1. And here you can see that the policy that you get after this divergence tries to push with actions with a force of 20,000, which is of course not possible. So this is just because the actions are bounded, but the reward itself considers the unbounded action, and the gradient will try to push the actions beyond the bound, which is not possible. Of course, if we use a squash Gaussian policy, this may avoid this. Another striking phenomenon is the following. In fact, if you do just exactly as before, but you add a small positive value to the reward at each step, then suddenly it does not diverge anymore. Here you can see what I told you we should expect, which is that the actions will stop being large and the reward will converge to 0. Okay, in fact, the car will stop moving. So this shows something which is very important that is not always said in papers, which is that for neural networks to work properly, it is nice if the reward signal is a small positive number. Okay, and in the previous case, it was a small negative number, and you had something that diverges. Whereas if you had a small number, then you will get something that does not work but does not diverge. Okay, this issue is reward normalization. It is good to get your reward between 0 and 100 above your whole episode. But the point still is that no initial Bernoulli nor normal policy can reach the flag, because the actions that you get from your initial policies are not strong enough to push the car on the right up to the flag. So what can we do? An idea would be to initialize the policy with behavioral cloning. So it's very easy in Mountain Car to write an expert policy. You just say push left for, let's say, 20 time steps and then push right as much as you can. And this will work. Okay. So by just writing an expert policy that does this and then using behavioral cloning on that policy, you get something that works, that reaches the flag. So the total reward over the episode is close to 100 because you just have to use some energy for pushing. You can see that from time to time it will fail, but basically it works. So the fact that it fails here is interesting. This is due to the fact that the learning algorithm is trying to push as few as possible, and eventually it will push just a little too few, and in that case you won't reach the flag, the car will go down again and you will have to try again to reach it. An alternative to using behavioral cloning is to use more efficient exploration methods. This is, for instance, what we did with Cédric Collat and Pierre-Yves Odeillet with an algorithm called JEP-PG, where we first use an exploration technique to fill the replay buffer with data where the reward is found several times, and then we start learning from this replay buffer, and we have something that works. Let us now move to an even simpler environment, which is Pendulum. Okay, in Pendulum, you just want to have this stick upright. Okay, you just have two state variables, so the state space is very small. That's just the angle and the angular velocity, and you just have one continuous action, which is the torque that you apply to your pendulum to put it upright. Okay. But the point is that the reward function is a little complicated. It depends on your angle, on your angular velocity, and on the torque itself. Okay. And the idea is that you should, to get rewarded as much as you can, you should be upright with no velocity and applying no torque. So it would be nice to be able to reach the vertical stance and then to stop moving. And in these studies, I will use a normal policy. Okay, so that's one-dimensional, so I just have one output neuron for the center of my Gaussian and one output neuron for the variance. And here I have a small deep neural network with 24 neurons here and 36 neurons here. And again, what is very striking is that on this so simple classic controller environment, there is no way to get a policy gradient method that works. Here I get a standard reward at around minus 1000 and something, okay. Whereas simple direct policy search methods like the cross entropy method quickly find trajectories where you get rewards of minus 150. And it is not shown here, but also using state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithms like DDPG, SAC, or TD3 work properly on this benchmark. So with students, I determined that one of the key difficulties that makes it that the policy gradient method does not work is due to the fact that a very small change in the starting point can lead to completely different performance for the same policy. And that's difficult for policy gradient methods. Also, by using different instances of SAC with various hyperparameters, I can tell you that on this problem, a large mini-batch will help, as well as using a replay buffer and using some entropy. But you can get algorithms that will work well without using entropy regularization in Pendulum. This picture helps understanding what's happening. In fact, in this picture, we try to visualize the value of different policies, so by just changing a little the policy parameters. And okay, here you have the performance of policies between minus 1000 and minus 200. And to obtain this picture, we started from one policy and we have drawn random directions around this policy, and we had a look at the performance of the policy that we get along these different dimensions. And you can see that it is extremely noisy. So it is no surprise that a policy gradient technique cannot find an optimal policy in such a complicated landscape. So well, if you think of it, the policy gradient techniques work on CartPol, but they do not work on continuous mountain car, and they do not work either on pendulum, though pendulum is very, very simple. So let's study a third alternative, which is called swimmer. This one is interesting because, again, from the literature, it was shown several times in several papers that on swimmer, you get a much better performance with the cross-entropy method than with any policy gradient alternative. Okay, in practice, the cross-entropy method obtains very easily a performance of around 300 and a little more, in fact, whereas policy gradient methods and variants of these policy gradient methods obtain a performance around 40. So why is this so? Again, we investigated this with students and it took us quite a while to understand what's happening. The idea is that it is due to the discount factor. In fact, to measure the performance on swimmer, you sum the reward over 400 time steps, and the reward is related to the average velocity of the body of the swimmer. So first, to understand what's happening, you have to look at videos. And if you look at the video of the behavior of the swimmer that obtains performance above 300, you can see that it swims like a snake. Okay, it's performing snake-like movements, and that's very efficient. Whereas if you look at the behavior of a swimmer which obtains performance of around 40, what it does is the following. It just throws its tail in the right direction, and then it's stuck in that position and it's stopping there. Okay, so why is this happening? The issue is related, as I told you, to the discount factor. So if you take a discount factor of 0.99, which is what we usually do in deep reinforcement learning algorithm, we have to be aware that this number to the power of 400 makes something very, very small. Okay, close to 1%. Whereas if you change the discount factor and you put this one, then this number to the power of 400 is close to 1. Okay, so what's happening is that in that case, when we are using a discount factor of 0.99, what's happening in the last of the 400 steps do not matter at all. So what the swimmer is trying to do is to maximize its velocity at the very beginning. And a very efficient way to maximize its velocity at the very beginning is to throw its tail in the right direction. So by using this discount factor value, what you obtain is a strong local minimum where the swimmer just throws its tail forward. Whereas if you use a greater value for the discount factor, you get something that is working much better. Okay, and if you perform this change, then the policy gradient methods will start working as well as the cross-entropy methods. So this was a very good example, I believe, of a case where by just investigating in detail what's happening, you can figure out that in fact this is just a matter of hyperparameter tuning, but you have to know about the mechanisms to understand what's happening, because we could not figure out that this was the issue if we were not aware of the way the discount factor is used in the algorithm. So to conclude this part about using policy gradients in practice, I wanted to stress that each environment comes with its own issues. And quite obviously now, CartPol is the easiest classic control benchmark. And in this environment, basic policy gradient algorithm will work after some tuning, but even making it work requires investigating and understanding the phenomena. The point is that state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithms are more powerful, but they may still fail on simplistic benchmark. So here you have an example taken from this paper from Guillaume Matron and other colleagues, where in fact we just have a one-dimensional problem where the agent must just make one step on the left. And by using DDPG, we show that a few number of times it will fail even in this very simple environment, and we explain why in the paper. So my take-home message is the following. In fact, science is when it does not work, but we know why. Engineering is when it works, but we don't know why. And continuous action or reinforcement learning combines science and engineering. It does not work, and we don't know why. Thank you for listening, and if you have any question, don't hesitate.
Okay. I will start with the second question that I have in mind. Wouldn't the expert policy make the agent overlearn and destroy the exploration? So that's the case of continuous meta-encar. And indeed, if I take a deterministic expert policy and I try to learn it from behavioral cloning, as I said in the slides, sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. So I had to add noise to my expert policy so that I could learn it better, so that the transfer from the expert policy to the learned policy was good enough. So it's better if your expert policy is not completely deterministic. A more general question, do you think policy gradient methods have good potential for succeeding well in complex real-world scenario? It has cases in which you don't have a perfect simulator that gives clear feedback. Well, we spoke a little this morning about the so-called reality gap issue. And that's a question that is very important for roboticists like myself and Nicolas here. At the moment, it's a completely open question. There is no deep reinforcement learning algorithm that works just by you start it and it works on the robot and you're happy with that. You have seen probably those very nice experiments from OpenAI with dextrose manipulation or the Rubik cube, but it is clear from the paper that they are to engineer the solution a lot for months and months. So we are still far away from plugging a policy search algorithm into a robot to make it work immediately. And that was more or less my take-home message. I am a little bit surprised by the huge interest in reinforcement learning in the scientific community related to its rather poor performance at the moment in contexts such as robotics. What is the cross-entropy method? So you will have an entire class on this next week. But if you were there this morning, the cross-entropy method is a direct policy search method where you have a policy with some parameters, you change a little the parameters, and if what you get is better, then you improve it. Okay, I won't go into the details, but you will see that's from a larger family, which is called evolution strategies. Could you explain intuitively why having negative rewards may lead an algorithm to diverge as opposed to having positive rewards? That's a difficult question, I think. One idea, but I may be completely wrong, is that you are taking a gradient step towards an optimum, okay? And if your reward is negative, maybe you are moving away from your gradient direction, but there is only one direction to improve. There are many directions to move away, okay? So you may not be moving in the right direction when you move with negative rewards, but maybe I'm completely wrong with this answer. In continuous reinforcement learning, as for example with a vehicle, how do we cope with invalid actuation values? Can we let the algorithm know explicit limit values to avoid computing invalid action values? Okay, this was the case, for instance, with the example I gave you with continuous mountain car, where in fact the actions that you can take are bounded between -1 and 1, but the gradient itself can push to actions of infinite large values. Okay, and one way to avoid this is to make so that your policy will not output actions greater than your bounds. And for that, for instance, you can use the squash Gaussian so as to constrain your actions between a low and a high bound. Thanks for the nice comments. Okay, on the swimmer case, in fact, we can definitely take gamma equal to 1. In fact, in any episodic reinforcement learning problem, you can take gamma equals to 1. Okay, that works in general. It is interesting to get some discounts if you want to minimize variance and if you don't have effects as on swimmer. But on swimmer, we tried definitely with gamma equals to 1. That's exactly as if you take gamma very, very close to 1. Okay. In problems from operation research, the action space size are usually bigger than common reinforcement learning problems. Could you tell something about the number of action space dimensions state-of-the-art policy gradient methods could handle in practice? Okay, maybe in operation research, you more usually use discrete actions, and you can deal in reinforcement learning with very large discrete action spaces. Okay, in the continuous action case, what we do generally is those MuJoCo environments where we have some humanoids, etc. And I can tell that you can find efficient solutions with more than 30 dimensions in your action and in your state. Okay, and that's probably the. I don't believe there are examples with action dimensionality greater than 100. Probably the bound is around this. I know that maybe it is a too open question, but in your opinion, what is the most important aspect to apply reinforcement learning to real robotics case, reward engineering, physics and action limitations, or RL algorithm selection? To me, that's definitely not RL algorithm selection, okay, because we have plenty of those algorithms, and okay, OpenAI, who are probably the state-of-the-art team in that domain, use PPO, but you could use something else. And I'm afraid that there are many issues, so you cannot say that one issue is more important than the other one. Sample efficiency matters a lot. You have to deal with the bias variance compromise. You have to deal with many issues. So, okay, in terms of engineering, you should definitely read OpenAI papers because they give lots of hints on what they did in practice to have something that works. But probably this is not through the reinforcement learning algorithm itself that they got something that works. Nicola wanted to answer this question? No? You said you are surprised with the enthusiasm from DeepRL regarding results. What are other methods you consider more interesting? For robotics, I believe that there is still a lot of progress to be made by combining standard control model-based methods with learning methods. Okay, that's something I believe a lot in, where you, in fact, with the learning methods, you learn to deal with the difference with what your model tell you to do. Okay. That's something that we have investigated a little with colleagues like Vincent Padois that Nicolas Mansart knows. Well, I don't know what to add on that. Quite naive question. I tried playing with mountain car gym environment and I noticed is that at the beginning of the training, there were lots of initialization where the car just stuck and the episode is not finishing. Okay. Yes, so that's exactly the issue that I told you about. In fact, in continuous mountain car or in mountain car, you need strong exploration in the beginning. Otherwise, you won't find the reward. And if you don't find the reward, the deceptive gradient effect will lead you to the car stuck on the bottom of the hill. Okay. So what you need is an efficient exploration method. And now there are many papers about this. And the paper that I pointed with Cédric Collat is a starting point on that. Have I tried model-based reinforcement learning for robotics? Unfortunately not, and that's weird because I was fond of model-based reinforcement learning. So just a word about this. Until, let's say, 2 years ago, most state-of-the-art methods were model-free reinforcement learning techniques, and people were saying that it was probably easier to learn a policy than to learn a model of the system that you want to control. Okay, but things are changing now. There are more and more efficient methods to learn models of the dynamics of your system, and there are more and more efficient model-based reinforcement learning methods to use these models. So yes, definitely moving towards model-based reinforcement learning is a good idea, and I'm quite sure that Jean-Baptiste Mouret, who is a lot interested in learning with very few data, will show you that using model-based method is a good idea, because with model-based method, you need much less data to learn than with model-free methods. Are there other alternatives to the squash Gaussian for handling out of bounds actions? Yes, of course, you could use any function that restricts the output of your neural network between two bounds. And the squash Gaussian is the most standard one, but you can use anything. Have you any clue about the policy they use in AlphaZero to be so successful? Okay, I did not speak about AlphaZero. That's something completely different. In AlphaZero, you need to have discrete actions, which was not my topic, so it's more related to DQN. But also, you need a very strong assumption which is that you are able to come back to any state so as to perform tree search. There was a class about Monte Carlo tree search. Was it yesterday or in the days before? So you should have a look at Monte Carlo tree search method, because they are at the heart of AlphaZero. AlphaZero is a Monte Carlo tree search method where you use a neural network so as to approximate your tree search method. Okay, everybody's happy?
Yeah, we are good for now, and
Okay.
it's time to finish. So thank you very much.